Alpha Primus, a prototype creation of Belisarius Cawl and his loyal guard dog. A space marine that may be infused with the unstable gene seed of all the Primarchs, gifting him terrifying psychic power, monstrous physical strength, and constant pain so horrific that even a Night Lord would probably look at him and say, "Brother, are you okay?" So in today's video, I'm going to break down who Alpha Primus is, his powers, weapons, abilities, and his greatest feats. Then finally, in typical Fallen Cow fashion, how he scales compared to the rest of the 40k universe. Is Alpha Primus merely a prototype Primaris Marine, or is he secretly a new Primarch in power armor? Well folks, there's only one way to find out. Let's jump into the glorious Cawl. It's time to power scale. So as always, we first need to discuss who exactly is Alpha Primus, because honestly, he's one of the hardest characters in Warhammer 40k to truly pin down. Games Workshop clearly wants him to remain mysterious, but your favorite Fallen Cow is going to do his best to figure out everything I can about him. Let me equip my reading glasses real quick. Alright, so first off, Alpha Primus is a prototype of the Primaris Space Marines. However, unlike a normal Primaris Marine, he appears to have been altered on a level far beyond simple gene seed implantation. In fact, multiple sources imply that he may have been created using the original genetic templates tied to the Primarch project. And for many years, this resulted in many fans believing that Primus was some sort of 20 Legion Chimera, a space marine infused with the gene seed from multiple Primarchs at the same time, due to the fact that Belisarius Cawl had access to the Sanctum portum. And for those wondering what the heck this Sanctum portum is, well, let me tell ya. The Sanctum portum, originally known as the Magna Marta, contains the genetic legacy of all the Primarchs. This artifact is effectively the closest thing the Imperium has to the Emperor's original blueprints for the Primarch project, and Cawl has access to it. So you're probably also asking yourself, well Cow, doesn't this mean that Alpha Primus is indeed created from the Primarch's direct gene seed? Well, not exactly. We do know for a fact though that Primus himself knows that there's something fundamentally wrong with him, as seen in the book Gene Father. "This ship is in no fit state for war," he muttered. He was in poor humor and a good deal of pain. Every time they passed the veil into the immaterium, the warp pulled his soul partway out of his body. It was like having his skin torn off. Cawl had made him poorly, he thought, or at least had overreached himself, because Primus's spirit was not seated properly in his flesh. This was no ideal conjecture. He could see the misalignment with his witch sight, as a smeared rainbow aura around his limbs, and a ghostly doubling of his fingers if he held them up to his face. Besides the constant aches his engineered physique inflicted on him, he endured in acid spiritual discomfort each time they moved from one realm to the other that took hours to subside. So that line alone is incredibly important, because the warp is not simply hurting Primus physically, it's also reacting to his soul, as his spirit is literally becoming misaligned with his body. And that kinda sounds a little too familiar to the Primarchs. Throughout the wider 40k lore, the Primarchs are repeatedly implied to be more than biological beings. They are creatures of immense warp presence shoved into physical form. Magnus, Sanguinius, Kurz, Corvus Corax, all of them display evidence that they are partially spiritual entities bound to mortal flesh. For example, Corvus Corax seems to embrace these warp abilities and becomes a shape-shifting Primarch who can change his form at will. So it stands to reason that if Alpha Primus's soul seems to leave his body for a time after warp travel, then maybe there's a chance that Alpha Primus's soul is similar in nature to the Primarchs. But we never truly knew if this was the case, if Primus was indeed a Primarch created by Cawl, up until the release of 5 questions, which does give us a definitive answer, or at least the best answer we're ever going to get, on what Alpha Primus truly is. In this short story, Primus questions a demon about his existence, and he gets several shocking revelations. I'm going to read the whole entire thing, so everyone can interpret it in their own unique way. The thing sat, crossing spindly legs, fat belly flopping over bony knees. It leaned its toad-like head forward, then asked. He had given great thought to this inquisition. The first question was ever, what am I? It leered. The first, a template, an experiment, a mistake, a success, a failure, an offshoot, a shameful secret, a beloved work. I have heard this. A pale tongue flickered over ragged teeth. I know. 4. Primus clenched his teeth. Foolish. Did the books not say the Neverborn were tricksters? Am I truly Cawl's son? Of his flesh as much as of his work? In the flesh and effort both, said the demon. Your father is vain. 3. Primus's cheek twitched involuntarily. He could not be sure the demon was lying. Which of the Primarch's gene seed did he use to make me? The thing smiled evilly. None of them. 2. Primus's back stiffened. He began another question. Stopped. He had not expected this. He had thought himself some sort of chimera, overly gifted with genetic material from multiple sources. What did this mean? Had Cawl made his own? His mouth ran dry. There were rumors about him. Cawl had hoped, greedily, that all the Emperor's work was preserved in the St. Primus Portum, but a significant portion of the information needed to recreate the so-called immortal glands was missing. No new Primarch could ever walk the galaxy. Primus had never given the rumors about himself much credit. But maybe... Then am I a Primarch, he blurted. The thing's answer was cryptic. What are the Anathema's sons, but too much spirit and too little flesh? What is a nightmare if not the same? Am I a nightmare like them? You are shadow. They are the darkness. 2-1, we are done. The thing folded its arms and sat back. Now let's actually break this all down, because there's a lot to unpack here. And I feel like this short story really changes everything we know about Alpha Primus. The demon's first answer actually reinforces much of what we already knew, while simultaneously mocking Primus for it. Calling him the first a template, an experiment, a mistake, a success, and a failure. The demon is practically bullying him. Who knew warp bullying was a thing? The second question we also already knew the answer to, but it does confirm that Primus is literally Cawl's son, in flesh and effort both. So Belisarius Cawl did not simply implant organs into Alpha Primus. Instead, he inserted his own biological material. So in the truest sense, Alpha Primus is genetically tied to Belisarius Cawl. That immediately places Primus far closer to the Emperor's Primarch project than an ordinary Astartes. Then comes the single biggest revelation in the entire short story. Which of the Primarch's gene seed did he use to make me? None of them. This completely shatters the old 20 Legion Chimera theory. But the really important detail here is that the demon smiles evilly while saying it, implying there is still a deeper secret hidden within. And even Primus himself is completely blindsided by this answer. He believed he was made from multiple Primarch gene lines. He literally stiffens in shock because this answer destroys his own understanding of what he is. The story even says that Primus begins wondering if Cawl somehow attempted to make his own Primarch instead. And honestly, that now appears to be the most plausible explanation. Because here in 5 questions, it appears that Cawl, having possession of the St. Primus Portum, attempted to make his own Primarch, even though he was missing critical information from the Primarch project. This would explain why Primus possesses traits associated with the Primarchs without directly using their gene seed. It would also explain why his soul appears too powerful for his own body. It would explain why he radiates this unnatural presence, and it would explain why he exists in constant pain. Because unlike the Emperor, Cawl could not fully stabilize what he created. This is supported further by this question and answer. Then am I a Primarch? What are the Anathema's sons but too much spirit and too little flesh? So this answer is unbelievably important, because the demon never actually denies the comparison. Instead, it directly compares Primus's condition to the Primarchs. Earlier lore already established that Primus's soul does not properly fit inside his physical form, as seen in Genefather. So the demon now describes the Primarchs in the exact same way. Immense spiritual beings forced into flesh bodies too small to fully contain them. That heavily implies that Primus is some variation of this same concept. And then we finally get to the line that perfectly summarizes Alpha Primus as a character. You are a shadow, they are the darkness. Honestly, this may be the single best description of Primus possible. The Primarchs are the real thing, the real deal, the full darkness itself. And Alpha Primus is merely the shadow cast by the same darkness. But the important part there is a shadow is still darkness. It is limited, it is anchored, and it's tethered to something else. But it's still there. And that is why I think the most plausible explanation for Alpha Primus is that he is essentially a pseudo-Primarch. He's Cawl's incomplete attempt at replicating the Emperor's original work. He is not equal to the Emperor's sons, because Cawl lacked the Emperor's full understanding of genecraft, warp science, and soul manipulation. The result is something unstable and incomplete. A mini Primarch, for lack of a better term. At least, that's my interpretation of it. Of course, you might disagree. So let me know down in the comments what you think Alpha Primus truly is. But now that we've broken down who Alpha Primus is, and what he likely represents in the wider lore, we can actually move on to the part everyone cares about. His abilities, his weapons, and most importantly, his feats. First off, let's chat about his weapons, and Primus's war gear is actually surprisingly standard, at least on the surface. He wears Mark 10 tactical power armor, the same model as per Mars armor patterns, developed by Belisarius Cawl for the Indominus Crusade. This armor isn't a single fixed design, but a flexible system that can be reconfigured for different battlefield roles, from lighter reconnaissance missions to heavier assault configurations. In practice, it's one of the most advanced and adaptable armor systems in the Imperium, but it's still standard issue for Primaris Marines. His weapons are just as unremarkable on paper. A bolt pistol, a gladius, and a chainsword, all of which are standard Astartes equipment. However, as Cawl's personal enforcer, it's safe to assume these are top-graded, Mechanicus forged variants maintained to the highest possible standard. But yeah, his gear really isn't anything crazy. Outside of this, Alpha Primus is also incredibly experienced, as he has lived for 10,000 years alongside Belisarius Cawl, and should have fought through various missions and battles, giving him a ton of combat experience. Now let's discuss his baseline physical and psychic abilities. First off, his physical strength appears to be above a Primaris Marine, as seen for example in the book The Great Work. Alpha Primus pushed past Dalius roughly. His strength was phenomenal. He knocked Dalius's servo harness into the wall. But it does appear that he's not much stronger than a baseline Primaris Marine, as he is staggered by one of Fabius Bile's new men. He parried with his chainsword and was shocked by the strength of the blow. It staggered him as surely as a hit from a power-armored Adeptus Astartes would, implying that both his strength and more importantly his durability aren't that far off from your average Joe Schmo Primaris Marine. This is also supported by the fact that Primus literally can't overpower a simple gene-enhanced beastman named Brutus. This really does ground his strength a ton. And I mean, if we really wanted to get slanderous, he gets dogpiled by what's described as several gene-enhanced beastmen, which once again kinda solidifies that he's near to Space Marine strength. In terms of speed, Alpha Primus is seen blitzing Necron Cryptex in the book Archmagos, where he is so fast that they can't even react in time. The Necron raised its staff. Primus went for it. This seems a reality showed under the pressure of Necron tech sorcery. The Space Marine was too fast. His boot slammed down on the Necron's wrist, the ball joint popped out of its socket, and the hand, still gripping its staff, skidded away from its owner. Alien hexes died on the air. Primus followed the stamp with a downwards punch, smashing aside the being's curved blade, disrupting the charge of arcane time-warping power building around it. And throughout his showings in Warhammer 40k, Alpha Primus's physical abilities kinda stay grounded like this. Not as powerful as you thought, right? Thought he'd be taking off Space Marine heads like the Lion, right? Well, I will say there is one weird statement from Fabius Bile and Genefather that implies that since Primus doesn't know what he truly is, that perhaps he isn't fighting at his true full power. Bile nodded in understanding. Wise, I guess you also have not told him either, have you? Bile smiled fondly down at Primus. I can think of no other reason why he did not use the full extent of his abilities when he came against us. I was a little concerned, you know? I thought I might have bitten off more than I could chew. Yeah, so as you heard the Clone Lord, it appears that he's suggesting that Primus has, dare I say, the potential to be far stronger.
What did he say?
But since this is literally never mentioned again, and I don't know how Fabius Bile would even know the true extent of Primus's abilities when he literally just met him. So to me, this seems like just a glazing statement. And that if anything, Fabius Bile himself is trying to set up Alpha Primus as the next potential man. Is the Clone Lord a member of the Grimdark subreddit? Is he a power scaler? Oh god, the slander is too good! Now it's time to talk about Alpha Primus's psychic abilities, which are no joke. Right off the bat, we know they're stronger than your average Space Marine librarian, as seen in the Great Work, where we get this statement. Do so, said Felix, although I would prefer you to save your strength. This mountain is not done surprising us yet. If I weary myself, you have Alpha Primus. He is a rare talent. He is very powerful, said Felix. Far more powerful than I, said Gathan. I tried to look inside him, but he stopped me, and I would not dare attempt to skim the mind of Cawl for fear of Primus's reaction. What manner of creature is he? This is coming from a Primaris Epistolary, which is the third rank of Space Marine librarians. And their chief role, according to Genestealer, is to serve as the chief officer of communications, both on the battlefield and beyond. So they're a glorified FaceTime. But don't let that fool you, one of their number, Lydric Noxon, was able to one-shot a demon. And not just any demon, the Sapphire King, who was created by the frustrations of Ferrus Manus at the time of his death. Granted, Lydric is now a chief librarian, but it's still quite impressive that Alpha Primus is implied to be far beyond a librarian of this caliber. Throughout the novels he appears in, Alpha Primus displays a wide range of psychic powers, including telekinesis, telepathy, the ability to read and manipulate lesser minds, along with the ability to lift and hurl heavy objects weighing several tons with ease, cloak himself psychically to avoid detection, and unleash destructive warp-based attacks such as warp fire and lightning. Primus can also create psychic barriers powerful enough to stop incoming bolt shells mid-flight, giving him a variety of offensive and defensive warp powers. But his abilities go even further than that. Primus appears to possess a limited form of clairvoyance, allowing him to somewhat divine future events, and perhaps even more impressively, he can levitate both himself and other individuals, including fully armored Space Marines, who weigh several tons. An example of his psychic power comes from the book Archmagos, where Primus unleashes a massive psychic explosion, which is able to wipe out a large number of Flayed One Necrons, all at once. A globe of white-blue light burst from Primus, blasting apart the Flayed Ones piling on top him. They lifted easily off him, light as burning feathers, and rained down in every direction. Those hitting the edge of the time field caught like flies on sticky paper. Corposant crawled over the rest, eating into their sensitive electronic innards. They thrashed pitifully when they hit the ground. Primus stood tall, surrounded by shattered mechanisms. Unnatural fires burned in the floor, and the machines everywhere, even beyond the fascia where time was stilled. He fought off a queasy backwash coming off the black stone. Though not attuned either way, still the black stone upset the delicate balance of his soul and damaged his body. Blood trickled from his nose under his helmet. So even in the presence of Blackstone, he is able to use his warp abilities to destroy a large number of flayed ones. Though I will say that this high level of psychic powers does seem to have its limits, as he grows exhausted when levitating himself and several other destroyed Necron Scarabs while carrying a female historian for several long minutes. Another example of this ceiling is when he faces a pseudo-enslaver in the short story To Speak as One. And in that book, she clearly bullies him before he can even react. So he definitely has a definitive ceiling. Not to say that he isn't a powerful psyker, but it doesn't seem to be at the level of, say, Magnus the Red, who is able to atomize a fellow Primarch Vulcan and manipulate reality, time, and space to his will. Primus does seem like a powerful psyker, but nothing extraordinary. Now let's chat about his feats across established canon, because he has his fair share of kills on lower and high tier enemies. First off, he has eliminated Necron Scarabs, mutated Beastmen, and Inquisitor agents. He has also beaten Flayed One Necrons, Cryptex, and even a Pharaon by simply ripping its head off with his psychic abilities, as seen in the book Archmagos. Primus raised a hand. There was a flash of warp light. Lasek's head bent away from the broken piston, which promptly gave out completely. Primus closed his fist and twisted his hand, and the Pharaon's head wrenched free. And for those who don't know or are too confused, which honestly is kind of fair since the Necron hierarchy makes no sense, but think of it this way, it's kind of like that app, Mafia, and the Pharaons are the mob boss at level 99, as they sit at the very top of their race's hierarchy, which means yes, they are over Necron lords and overlords. And for more context, a Necron Pharaon is a very powerful being, with the strength to tear apart a space marine, with the durability to tank most mortal weapons in the galaxy, such as multi-melta shots, and should be one of the greatest threats to an Adeptus Astartes in the current setting of 40k. In addition to this, he also defeats a large number of Gene Stealers in the book The Great Work, and even battles a powerful enhanced new man from Fabius Bile's lab named Porter in the book Genefather, who, as I touched on earlier, can match him in strength. Primus and Porter fought through the wreckage of the hangar. Porter leapt nimbly over obstructions. Primus bulldozed his way through them, trampling the mixed organics and machinery of dead Skitarii. Porter attacked relentlessly with shockingly powerful strength. She rained blows down upon him, her speed incredible. The force of her blows took its toll on his chainsword, and soon it was bereft of teeth, and he cast it aside. Porter sensed the momentary distraction as Primus glanced at Bile, and aimed for Primus's vulnerable knee. He turned his leg just in time, her blade hitting within a fraction of an inch of the articulated metal of the joint back. Chips of ceramite exploded from the blow. Primus countered with a backhand, a blow that would have shattered Rockcrete had it landed. But Porter dove to the side, rolling away. Primus fired at her, his shots chasing empty space. The bolt slammed into the floor, into the bodies, into the ships sitting on their launch pads. Craters, blue and everything. She wasn't tiring. Their fight continues like this for some time, with both of them evenly matched, until Porter ultimately makes a mistake. And it results in Alpha Primus shattering her ribcage and sending her flying. When she recovers moments later and launches yet another attack, Primus finally ends the fight with a psychic blast powerful enough to send debris crashing down upon her. So while this is ultimately a victory for Primus, the fight itself is very telling, because without heavily relying on his psychic abilities, this battle is incredibly close. Primus is clearly superior overall, but not to the point where he can casually beat her in a purely physical fight. In fact, you could reasonably conclude that this fight ranges anywhere from a solid mid-diff all the way to even a high diff, depending on how much weight you give his psychic finisher. And honestly, that's going to be real important for scaling him later. Now that we've established Alpha Primus's physical and psychic baseline, Along with his feats, we can finally ask the question, where does he belong in the wider 40k power hierarchy? How does he stack up against baseline Astartes? Against elite Space Marine captains? Against figures like Custodes or even the Primarchs? So yeah, it's everyone's favorite part of the video. It's time to move on to scaling Alpha Primus against the rest of the wider 40k universe. Alright, as always, we're using the much loved Cawl's Power Pyramid to scale Alpha Primus against the wider 40k universe. And of course, we're using the same tiers as always. At the bottom, we've got the Chapter Master tier. This is where you'll find Space Marine Chapter Masters, Tau Commanders, Orc War Bosses, and the other elite but still fundamentally mortal battlefield leaders. Above that is the Enhanced tier, where you can find Grey Knights, Custodes, and high-end Demon Princes, depending on how empowered they are at that current moment. After that is the Low Primarch tier. This is where you find characters like the named Greater Demons, Avatars of Cain, and the unamped, unaltered base Primarchs, like Lorgar, Omegon, Alfarius, and Guilliman. Then we move on to the High Primarch tier, the apex of the base Primarchs, where we can find Sanguinius, the Lion, Horus, Conrad Kurz, and Lehman Russ. Above that is the Planetary tier. This is the realm of Demon Primarchs and the major Catan Shards, beings that are able to threaten or destroy entire worlds. Then we hit the Cosmic tier, where we find the Silent King and the Emperor in 30k. Characters whose decisions and power can shape entire civilizations and destroy entire star systems. And finally, at the very tippity top of the 40k universe is the Multiversal tier, the absolute apex of the setting. In this tier we have the Emperor who is stuck on the Golden Throne in the current setting, God Emperor Horus at the height of his power during the Siege of Terra, the fully ascended Chaos Gods, and the full Catan, like the Nightbringer or the Void Dragon. Now with those tiers laid out, where exactly does Alpha Primus fit into all of this? Well, first things first, Alpha Primus is 100% not operating at the top of the setting. He would be instantly overwhelmed by anything in the multiversal, cosmic, or even planetary tiers. Mainly because he simply does not have the feats, scaling, or demonstrated raw power to justify that kind of placement. The perfect reason for this comes from the book The Great Work, where he actually faces down against a Catan Shard, and it doesn't exactly end well for Cawl's son. You are reckoned strong in the ways of the Soul Sea. It glowered at Primus, then moved its hand and lifted it, palm upwards. Primus dropped Cawl's axe as he began to choke, and rose kicking from the ground. He clutched at his throat. Then match yourself against us. It glared dismissively at Primus. Feeble, even in our weakened state, you can't oppose us. Yeah, so Primus doesn't exactly fare well against this single shard, as he can't do anything but get force choked. But to make things even easier for the herd watching, we can use this same feat to stop Primus from landing in either the high or low Primarch tier. Insane, right? But think about it. If he is truly a Primarch entity, then I don't know, maybe he would have actually put up some resistance instead of kicking his feet like a toddler. In battle against Catan Shards, we see Primarch level entities like, say, Trazyn the Infinite actually hold their own for some time and land blows against a Catan Shard, unlike Mr. Primus here. Not sold? Well, there's also the fact that I touched on earlier, that he seemed to only be able to match strength with an enhanced beastman named Brutus. The two Gene Rod beings struggled against each other, strength against strength. Disruption lightning crackled around them. Primus clenched his jaw. Brutus grunted, pushing on the axe, shifting its weight to drive the blades down towards Primus's helm. There was no momentum to the blade, but the touch of the disruption field alone would kill him, shattering the atoms of his helm and then his head. Although Primus does kill Brutus, it's not by overpowering him. It's by shooting him through the throat while they're in a deadlock. So his strength is definitely nowhere near a Primarch, Greater Demon, or even an Avatar of Cain. For example, in the book Betrayer, base Angron lifted the foot of a Warhound Titan, which is hundreds of tons. And Primus can overcome a gene-enhanced Beastman. That's tough. And if you're still not sold, Guilliman himself doesn't even think Primus is a Primarch or even that much of a threat. Not quite. Lord Guilliman believes that Alpha Primus is something more than a prototype. He is a personal project of Cawl's. He has certain gifts that no others have. His psychic ability is only part of it. Did he attempt to reproduce the Emperor's work? I have no doubt Guilliman would have killed Cawl had he gone that far. Primus is a Space Marine. Not like the rest of us perhaps, but a servant of the Imperium nonetheless and Adeptus Astartes. He is no Primarch. Now I know some people like to argue that Alpha Primus is that guy, but reality is just far more grounded. Taking all of his showings and statements together, he simply does not scale anywhere near the multiversal, cosmic, planetary, or even the high and low Primarch tiers. He is just not beating any of the base Primarchs, nor any of the high-end name-greater demons like Skarbrand or Angarath, and he also falls well short of beings like the Avatar of Cain. So that means we're left with two plausible tiers. He's either in the Enhanced or Chapter Master tier. Thankfully, when you look at Alpha Primus's psychic powers, abilities, and his actual feats, like casually popping off the head of a Necron Pharaon, I think it's safe to say that he comfortably scales above the Chapter Master tier. If Primus fought something like an Orc Warboss or standard Space Marine Chapter Master, I think it's very likely that he would emerge triumphant. Physically, the gap between them would not be massive, and honestly, it would probably be almost relative, but once you factor in his psychic abilities, Primus simply has far more versatility than his opponents. So then the question becomes, where exactly does he belong in the Enhanced tier? Well, to be honest, I think he pretty clearly scales above a baseline Grey Knight. His psychic output, diverse abilities, and overall combat ability are just on another level compared to most standard Grey Knights. Which brings us to another hard question to answer. Could he defeat a Custodes? Well, Adeptus Custodes are pretty absurd. These are warriors that are able to react in microseconds, and they exist physically far beyond a standard Space Marine. The classic comparison honestly still works perfectly. A Custodian is to a Space Marine what a Space Marine is to a Guardsman. They are faster, stronger, more durable, and vastly more skilled than almost anything in the setting short of a Primarch level entity. So if we're talking physically, I don't think Primus would be able to match them. His strength feats are either below theirs, or if we really want to glaze them, maybe roughly comparable in certain situations. But I don't think his feats consistently support that interpretation. His speed and durability also seem far below a Custodes standard. So overall, his physical baseline is not quite at a Custodes level. However, remember folks, he's also a space wizard. And once you factor in those psychic abilities, this power scaling conversation does change dramatically. Because unlike most opponents Custodes face, Primus brings an extremely powerful warp-based kit to the battlefield, which includes telekinesis, psychic barriers, mind manipulation, warp blast, and overall battlefield control. That combination paired with his skill set and combat knowledge is just simply nasty. So while I think a fight between Primus and a Custodian would absolutely be a high diff battle, I do lean towards Primus narrowly pulling out a victory more often than not, due to his psychic toolkit compensating for the physical gap. So Alpha Primus scales above Custodes, but what about Demon Princes, who sit at the very top of the Enhanced tier? Well, Demon Princes are kind of in the same boat. Most standard Demon Princes are monstrously powerful beings. They are physically much stronger than your standard Astartes, and are able to rip apart entire armored vehicles, crush elite warriors, and survive an absurd amount of punishment, thanks to their warp-enhanced forms. Many of them also possess powerful psychic abilities on top of their physical strength. However, Demon Princes vary wildly, depending on how empowered they are at that current moment by the Ruinous Pantheon. So against most standard demon princes, I think Primus would probably pull out the win, as once again, his psychic toolkit and veteran knowledge gives him a huge edge against many opponents, who rely primarily on brute force and durability. So overall, I think Alpha Primus most likely lands at the absolute top of the enhanced tier, primarily due to his psychic abilities. But here's where he hits an absolute wall, and I don't think he's beating the other beings at the top of this tier, like say Constantine Valdor, the Captain General of the Custodes in 30k, and Trajan Valorous, the Captain General of the current era. It's like that one JJK meme, the greatest custody of all time versus the greatest custody in the modern age. These are characters that are repeatedly described as approaching Primarch level combat capability through sheer speed, skill, and martial prowess. And against opponents like that, I think Primus just falls short. Even with all of his psychic abilities, Valdor or Trajan are simply going to be too fast, too disciplined, or too skilled in combat for Primus to overcome. He might pressure them psychically, but ultimately I think they would close the gap, outmaneuver him, and slice him into ribbons before he could fully capitalize on his powers. So yeah, that's Alpha Primus. He's not a true Primarch, but he's also clearly not an ordinary Space Marine. He exists in this weird middle ground. He's a failed success, a shadow of the Emperor's original work, and potentially the closest thing the Imperium has seen to a recreated Primarch project in 10,000 years. But when it comes to actually scaling him, the evidence points towards him landing at the very top of the enhanced tier. He's stronger than your average chapter masters, orc war bosses, Tau commanders, Grey Knights, and potentially has the capability to defeat a Custodes, or a standard demon prince, in extremely difficult fights, thanks to his psychic toolkit. But once you start getting into true Primarch level monsters, like the absolute greatest Custodes, or the stronger name greater demons in the setting, Primus does not have the physical feats or consistency to keep up. Still though, for a failed experiment, this dude is pretty cracked. But anyway guys, this is going to wrap up today's installment of Power Scaling Peeps. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know down below what you think Alpha Primus actually is. Oh boy, hope there's not a civil war brewing in the comments section. Also, a huge shout out to my Patreon and YouTube members: Impossible Paul, Zyblinky, Tyler Pick 7, Ritter S, Musty, Kidri, Seth Capizilla, Lag, Kunny Karkle, Caleb White, Dinkleberry, and Michael Skipper 7277. Thank you guys a ton, and if you would like to support the channel, I'd greatly appreciate it. But like I've said many times, I will never hide my content behind a paywall because I hate capitalism. With all that said, stay milk guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.